I am back with 3 more really simple ways to decorate your macaron shells with royal icing. I'm starting off with some regular old macaron shells and some royal icing. You can see my previous tutorial if you're not sure about how to make that. And for the first one, I'm going to be coloring my stiff royal icing with 2 different colors, kind of a burgundy and then a burgundy and orange, and using a little bit of water to thin that down to kind of a drizzleable consistency. But instead of drizzling, I'm going to be piping the royal icing onto the back of a small palette knife. If you don't have a palette knife, first of all, I recommend getting one. It is super, super important to have in any pastry kitchen. That you could probably use a regular butter knife or maybe the back of a relatively flat spoon or something like that as well. I am just going to take the top of one macaron shell, turn my palette knife upside down with a bit of pressure at one side, press and scrape along the top and then release. So I am just kind of painting and smearing the royal icing across from one side to the other. That is it. That is the whole technique. Depending on what colors you use, how many colors you use, the color of your macaron shell, you can have so many different looks. I have seen a lot of people play around with rainbow things or, color match other details they're doing, mermaids or things like that, and really taking the same color palette but then creating a really simple kind of design that maybe doesn't take quite as much time. It's really easy, but it still has a really cool kind of painted, smeared appearance. Okay, for the next technique, I am again starting off with a really stiff royal icing, adding a bit of water and a bit of gel food coloring. I believe that was the dusky rose color or whatever it's called from AmeriColor, and I am just creating this really beautiful rose-ish color in pink because I want to use a piping bag to create a single line rose. So instead of using a piping tip, I used a scissors to cut off a really tiny corner of this piping bag, and starting at the center, I'm going to pipe in one continuous line, going around in kind of a swirl, but creating some edges and going over instead of just like swirling out without ever crossing the borders. I'm going to pipe around and go over. I'm never going to backtrack, but I am going to go over and kind of go more into the center or out towards the edge until I feel satisfied with the shape and the edges and how it looks. Basically, I'm just trying to create something that vaguely looks like a rose, but again, created with just one continuous line. It is actually way easier than it looks. I don't necessarily think you need to have a lot of artistic talent to be able to create that. It is just basically like making a little bit more complicated swirl. For this last little design I'm going to show you, I have some white royal icing that I've thinned down and then some that I've created a thin yellow royal icing I put into a piping bag. And now I'm going to use a relatively small paintbrush to paint some really simple daisy looking flowers on this macaron. Now you can go all out with painting. You can create some really intense and gorgeous designs, but I want to keep this really simple, something that's very approachable. So I'm basically just streaking inwards one swipe of my paintbrush at a time. Now, you absolutely can create this design just with gel food coloring, just with luster dust, with macaron batter, but the really cool thing about doing this with royal icing is that kind of like the difference of using acrylic paint versus watercolor paint. When you're painting on macaron shells, most of the time you're not building up anything, and so it looks more like a watercolor paint. But when you paint with royal icing, you get that acrylic sort of vibe or oil painting sort of vibe, and you can have all of this texture and ridges, and it allows for a little bit more movement, something a little bit more dynamic than the flat surface of just painting with a gel food coloring on your macaron shell. And because royal icing dries so quickly, you really do not run the risk of ruining your shell from moisture. So it is a really cool technique to play around with, just like all three of these techniques from this video. Again, even though these look like they are quite sophisticated and lovely, they do not take that much time, and they are really accessible and easy to do in your home kitchen. You really don't need many tools or any specialty know-how in order to create these or similar designs. If you were inspired by this or any of my other videos, I would love to see your own creations on Instagram, so make sure to tag me at Maddie Brame so I can see your creations as well. And if you're not already subscribed here, I would love to see you here again next time for my future tutorials. So if you haven't already, click that subscribe button so you don't miss out. Until next time, have a wonderful day. Bye!